Welcome and thank you so much for joining the National Down Syndrome Society's webinar, Workplace Accommodations for Adults with Down Syndrome, What Caregivers Need to Know. Whether you're a parent, sibling, a professional, or friend, your role as a caregiver matters deeply. We're excited to have you with us. This is the third webinar in our Caregiver webinar series, which is happening throughout the month of October, National Down Syndrome Awareness Month. Be sure to check out our website for additional webinar offerings in this series. My name is Ryan Rotundo, and I am the Director of Community Partnerships and Engagement here at NDSS. Before we dive into today's content, I would like to go over just a few housekeeping items to ensure that everyone has an enjoyable experience throughout today's webinar. First of all, if you experience any technical issues at all during the webinar, please use the chat function to notify our support team. Folks are standing by who can assist you as promptly as possible, and they will do their best to make sure they resolve whatever IT issues you're having. Also, we just want to share that our presenters will answer questions at the end of today's webinar. So we encourage you to submit your questions through the webinar or for the webinar using the Q&A feature. So that's different than the chat function. It is the Q&A feature located near the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to get to all of the questions, or at least as many as we possibly can during the designated Q&A time. If we're unable to answer your question or unable to get to your question during the event, or you have a very specific, maybe more personal question, we will be sharing an email address toward the end of today's webinar that you can use to contact us. Please note that we will not be using the raise hand feature during the course of this webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the NDSS YouTube channel and NDSS website within just a few days after today's session. You will receive an email with a link within the next couple of days and links to some of the resources mentioned on today's presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. Let's get started. Founded in 1979, so if you're doing the math, we did just celebrate our 45th anniversary. The National Down Syndrome Society's mission is to create a world where individuals with Down syndrome thrive. You may have recently seen some of the announcements and this updated mission statement along with some of our other exciting updates. And in case you missed it, NDSS recently acquired LuMind IDSC Foundation. For more information about the joining together of these two organizations and the incredible impact it will have on the Down syndrome community, please visit the link in the chat. So just want to share a little bit about NDSS. Our employment program seeks to increase access to the workforce for all people with Down syndrome. Through collaboration with NDSS, affiliate organizations, employers, government agencies, and other key stakeholders, NDSS creates meaningful change in the professional lives of people with Down syndrome across the country. Specifically, NDSS advocates for policies that increase access to competitive integrated employment, or CIE, for individuals, provides valuable resources, support, and training to the community. We also offer technical assistance to corporations and highlight the success of employees, and business owners with Down syndrome. Today's speaker will share some helpful tips and resources on requesting job accommodations. And we also wanted to point out a few NDSS resources that might be helpful along your employment journey. Our resume resources help individuals with Down syndrome create clear and professional resumes by providing easy to follow guidance, a checklist to ensure nothing is missed, and downloadable templates. Our Partnering for Career Success Guide offers practical tips for individuals with Down syndrome who are interested in pursuing competitive integrated employment in their community. The guide also includes a real-life success story, actually several real-life success stories that show how the right support and job fit can lead to meaningful career achievements while highlighting each person's unique talents. And if your loved one is looking to gain experience through giving back, our volunteer resource can be a great place to start. It was created by Programs Associate at NDSS, Charlotte Woodward. We encourage you to explore these and other resources after today's webinar at the link provided. As we continue to celebrate the month of October, Down Syndrome Awareness Month, and National Disability Employment Awareness Month, we want to highlight the incredible talent in our community. Stories of employment success are so important because they show the skills, abilities, and contributions of people with Down syndrome, and they help to break down stereotypes. We invite you, families, caregivers, and supporters, to share your loved one's employment story. This can include paid jobs, internships, volunteering, or meaningful work experience. Every story matters. These stories not only honor individual accomplishments, but also help educate employers and the broader community about the talent and value individuals with Down syndrome bring to the workplace. These stories can also be especially meaningful when we advocate for employment policies on Capitol Hill, both at the state and federal level. My colleague will share a link to our success story submission form in just a moment, and it will also be shared in the follow-up email. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Lisa DeMoss. Lisa DeMoss has worked in the field of disability services for 26 years. Lisa was employed at a large nonprofit service agency that provided supportive employment, housing, job training, and rehabilitation services for adults with disabilities. She's also worked in the field of early intervention, providing health and disability coordination for a multi-county children intervention program. Lisa has a master's degree in education and resides in Missouri. We are excited to have Lisa join us today. Lisa, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm currently with Jan, and Jan is the Job Accommodation Network. So today I'm specifically going to speak to you about job accommodation issues for employees with Down syndrome, and possibly give you some ideas about accommodations or navigation tools for employment issues. So a little bit about Jan. Again, Jan stands for the Job Accommodation Network. It was established at the University of West Virginia. Even before the ADA was put in place, they were doing accommodation outreach and received the grant from the Department of Labor to provide the JAN services. We are national and we are free. That's always an important word when we're talking about resources. We are a free consulting service funded by the Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy. So what does JAN do? We partner with both employers and employees, and we'll speak to really anyone. I speak to rehab professionals, I speak to parents, I speak to husbands, wives, the employee themselves, obviously a lot of HR, even attorneys and doctors will call Jan, because we have technical information and guidance on Title I of the ADA, which is the employment part of the ADA. So we can talk to you about the accommodation process and ideas for how to make it go smoother, or maybe what should happen. We can definitely talk about job accommodation ideas. Again, Title I of the ADA and any related legislation to Title I is our specialty. We'll make referrals for other areas like public access and education, but Title I employment's our bread and butter, so to speak. We also actually have one consultant that will talk about self-employment for people with disabilities. So we've branched out a little in that area with entrepreneurship. So that's, in a nutshell, the services that we provide. Again, we will speak to anyone, but generally our original mission was to speak to employers to implement the ADA employment provisions, but we get a lot of calls from individuals, from job seekers, again, entrepreneurs, and even rehab professionals, attorneys, and doctors. All can use our service. It just depends on the question, whether we're going to have a good answer or make a referral to them. Next slide. Our website is full of information. It's actually typically where I go to get information, but it is a behemoth. There's a lot of information there. So calling us, texting us, emailing us, or chatting in are all great ways to synthesize this information down to a usable format. I had a call or a chat yesterday from somebody who had researched court cases regarding their question. And, we don't really research court cases. We look at what the EEOC guidance says, and that's the best guidance we can give. So she'd taken a lot of time to do her own research, but in the end, the guidance I had was a little bit more accurate than what she had found. So it's always good to give us a call. I will talk more about how to contact us at the end of the slide presentation. Okay, so let's dive into reasonable accommodation. And that is a term the ADA uses when it deals with employment of people with disabilities. They have a right to ask for reasonable accommodation, and it's a modification or change. So if it's something that's already provided at work, there may not be a need for a formal accommodation. It's things that are above and beyond what typically happens in the work environment. So it could be a modification to a job application because the ADA extends all the way to pre-employment stage for individuals seeking employment. It could be a modification to the work environment or how the job is done. Taking away essential duties isn't necessarily reasonable, but the way they're done could be different for an individual with a disability, even if others aren't allowed to make those changes that don't have a disability. And then finally, it enables an employee with a disability to enjoy the equal benefits and privileges of employment that are enjoyed by other employees who do not have disabilities. So I'm going to kind of go into these definitions a little bit more in the next few slides. One thing I wanted to talk about was disclosure, and we'll talk a little more about this, but disclosure is giving out specific personal information about your disability. And it may be obvious in some cases that an individual has Down syndrome, but what might not be obvious is how it limits that person. So one thing that individuals sometimes misunderstand is, well, I told my employer when I was hired I had a disability. They should have known that I couldn't get to work on time, or that I was going to need extra help manipulating objects or something. And that's not necessarily the case. Just because they have a known disability doesn't necessarily mean that the employer is going to know exactly what limitations need to be accommodated. So that's a big part of where disclosure, it's disclosing the limitations in your case for your individuals with Down syndrome and how they affect the work. So that's an important part of disclosure, that it may be known they have a disability, but what do they need specifically and what is limiting them specifically? Next slide, please. An example might be a production worker is having difficulty grasping a plastic bottle to accurately apply an adhesive label, and they ask for help. This is a job accommodation if that person has a disability. And if you notice, they didn't say, I need a job accommodation, because ADA clearly says you don't have to use that language. You can say, I have a disability, I have a limitation, I'm having difficulty doing my job because of it. And this is a great example of making that statement. The production worker may not know what they need to fix it, and they don't have to know the exact solution. They may have an idea. The employer may have an idea. The next step would be an interactive conversation about the disability and the limitation. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about what does it mean to get an accommodation to receive a benefit or a privilege of employment. In this example, it's a bus garage employee who can't read well, and when they attempt to read, they get anxious, they miss instructions, and things are coming to them by email that they need to know. So the benefit and privilege of employment is communication being sent via email. His job isn't to read emails, but it is a benefit or privilege of employment. So there would be an obligation for the employer to consider other modes of communication that would enable this person to to effectively be notified of important information, either verbally or other ways. So next slide, please. Then it said unusual circumstances might be a reason for an accommodation, and that might be a sudden change to the environment. In this case, a warehouse worker in Florida where it gets very hot never had a problem working until they had to work in the heat. And then they have a disability that affects their body temperature regulation. So in this instance, you know, accommodations, maybe it could be leave. It could be working in another area that's not affected by the air conditioner breakdown. You know, but something needs to be done to accommodate that situation that wasn't existing until there was an environmental circumstance that caused it. Next slide. So a little bit more on disclosure, and then we'll move into some accommodation ideas. You need the individual or their representative needs to let the employer know they need an adjustment or change at work because of a disability. Again, going back to that first example, they could use plain English, don't have to use any kind of formal wording, form, process. And technically, it doesn't even have to be in writing. It doesn't have to mention the ADA. It can be requested by another person. And that's specifically spelled out in the EEO guidance in reasonable accommodation and undue hardship. And it need not use the specific phrase reasonable accommodation. So it's pretty simple. Now, agencies may have forms they've created, but under the ADA, it's very open and informal at its root. Next slide. So verbally or in writing. And why would we do it in writing when it doesn't have to be? Obviously, we can't have a record that you did ask. So yes, it could be verbal, but I worked in HR long enough to know putting it in writing is a good idea. You can tell whoever can act on that request. So sometimes we start with the supervisor. And the supervisor may say, I've been trained that there's a person in HR that handles this. You need to go to that person, and that's perfectly fine. Businesses can designate a person to handle accommodations. Or if you go to the supervisor and they go, well, no, you don't get that because nobody else gets that, and you really feel like this person has a right to that accommodation, that might be another reason to go to HR, you know. But you can start with somebody you think has the authority to act on that accommodation request. Jan has an individuals page on our website, and the bottom link, how to request an accommodation form letter, is available on our individuals page. We do have a lot of templates. If you're having a hard time finding a particular template, you can give us a call or chat or text in. But that is one that we are providing there. And it's just kind of that step-by-step, who do I talk to? What information do I need to give? And then how do I ask? And it's a pretty simple one-page guide to asking. Next slide. So documenting a disability, again, this may not be an issue for your individuals. But if a disability is not known or obvious, then the employer can ask for medical certification. But they can also ask when the need for accommodation is not known or obvious. Now, intellectual disabilities under the law are, quote, virtually always qualifying disabilities. They're listed with blindness, deafness, certain conditions. But because of the virtually, if an employer asks for medical, of course, you have the right to push back on anything, but if you have it readily available, it could be from Voc Rehab or any kind of rehab professional. You may consider just producing it. That's up to you. I just wanted you to understand that it's virtually always going to qualify, but some employers kind of do this blanket. We want medical to verify all disabilities, and That's not completely in line when it's obvious they shouldn't necessarily ask for that medical, but will they? I don't know. There's that possibility. And if you do have it, maybe giving it is easier than holding up the process, arguing about it. But that's, again, that's up to you. I'm just trying to inform you of what may happen and what your rights might be under that ADA. Next slide, please. Okay, so generally when we're providing that documentation, the diagnosed impairment, and then what major life activities are limited. The major life activities are listed here. I think what's really helpful is applying the life activities to the job duties. So standing, if the person gets fatigue and standing is causing issues, linking it, saying that's the limitation that they need accommodated. You know, reading, they don't read well, they read at a certain level, that's the limitation that they need accommodated. That's really helpful if you can link that limitation directly to job duties. Okay, next slide. And then, as I said, documentation doesn't have to be a medical doctor. It could be a vocational rehab professional, a licensed mental health professional, an educational professional, physical therapist. So it's not having to come from an MD. And, you know, some conditions that I deal with are neurological or may come from a psychiatrist because I deal with a lot of mental health, neurological, seizures, things like that. So it's not always even appropriate for an MD to be the one that's providing that medical documentation. And again, this is FYI. I doubt you're going to get asked for medical documentation, but I just wanted to be sure you were aware of the rules around it. Next slide. And then finally on disclosure, so, sometimes disclosure is not something people want to do because they don't know they have a limitation that's going to affect the job. First of all, it's not required under ADA if it's obvious the person has a disability. And then sometimes people have had a bad experience with stereotypes or managers that are not aware of their ADA rights, where they need to take that to maybe a next level. So, okay, I think that's it on disclosure. We can move on now. There's one more resource that will be available to you in the slide deck after the training about disclosure called the 411 on disclosure. That's just a resource I wanted to make available from our parent agency, ODEP. Next. All right, so we're going to get into some specific job issues and accommodation ideas for them now. So we're going to start out talking about performance and conduct accommodation. And the first one is around performance. So it's important to know that as an accommodation, an employer never has to remove what they consider an essential job function to the job. Sometimes jobs have marginal functions. Those could be swapped out with somebody else or something of that nature, but the essential job functions are the purpose of why that job exists. They never have to lower production standards, lower performance standards, or remove essential job functions as an accommodation. So when it comes to performance, it's the way that the employee does it that may change, the manner in which they do it, and the tools that they use. So our first scenario is an employee with Down syndrome had to roll silverware in a cloth napkin. The Jan user asked for an accommodation solution to help this employee find the hem of the napkin. It was important that the silverware was rolled with the hem side in instead of out, so it didn't look like it was rolled wrong side out. Next slide, please. So the person calling had tried to just talk about the visual difference with the employee, and that didn't really seem to stick with her, just to say, look for this line, look for this. So one idea was to have a photo with kind of an exaggerated hemline, this side up kind of a thing. And then one of the options that seemed to be the best was to take a knife, just something that was available, like a pan scraper or a knife, and run it along the edge. It's going to snag on the hem side up and roll right over the hem side down so that they can find that hem side and roll the silverware appropriately. So sometimes there's not one simple answer, obviously, to an accommodation question. You know, we're looking at trying to make a visual difference with looking at it, with looking at a photo, and then finally a tactile, concrete, hands-on solution to this issue. So next slide, please. We're going to talk about conduct now. And conduct is touchy because employers do not have to remove generally accepted conduct requirements that all employers are required to abide by, such as not tolerating insubordination, disrespect, violence, destruction of property, belligerence. Those things in general, regardless of disability status, generally do not have to be tolerated by any employer. Okay, so let's look at the example here. An employee is written up after several verbal warnings for inappropriate conduct, placed on a 30-day plan of improvement, and warned that if the behavior doesn't stop within that time, she will be let go. She discloses that it's related to her disability and asks for accommodations to assist her in responding more appropriately to coworkers. Okay, and because at this point, the penalty for that is not dismissal yet, it's a good time to ask for an accommodation and to discuss it, because if the issue gets to the point of termination, they don't have to negotiate any accommodations at that point. They can let the person go. But if it's anything less than termination, they can discuss any appropriate accommodations. So the employer puts the plan of improvement on hold. In this case, they ask for medical. Like I said, you may not have to do that if the Down syndrome is obvious. And so they will discuss the accommodation, but they do not rescind the discipline that occurred before they ask for an accommodation. Once accommodations are put in place, the employer starts the performance improvement plan. So conduct is difficult because I do have employees contact me and say, they know I'm autistic. They know I have bipolar disorder. They know this. Or they know my son and daughter is, has an intellectual disability. They should give them more grace. And if it's, conduct of the nature I described earlier about belligerence and insubordination, they may not have to do that as an accommodation. They may have to try to help find ways to support that person, but they may not have to ultimately just allow them to behave in those ways. That's very important. Under the ADA, employers have a right to enforce generally accepted conduct rules, regardless of disability. Next slide. Okay, let's talk some more job accommodations. Next thing we'll talk about that many people think of as an accommodation is equipment, tools, modifying the environment, and it is a big part of accommodations in some cases. Next slide. Okay, here's a scenario. A mail clerk had difficulty remembering to go for his second mail collection run when he was involved in other tasks. So time management can be very challenging for a lot of different disabilities, and intellectual disabilities are no different. Multitasking, keeping on a schedule, doing those sorts of things. So this is, not an unusual scenario that I get from all different angles, but it is important to do the tasks in a timely manner. So next slide. This is the good thing in the world we live in now, is there are a lot of electronic options to help people stay on task. So in this case, they got a watch. They set a timer for that second run. The watch vibrated, alerted him, it's time to go on your run. Pretty simple. May even be the watch he already has, right? That's not, and I'm old enough to know that these things didn't exist a million years ago when I was young. But what's cool now is there are a lot of apps and tools and things that can help. In this case, the individual doesn't really even have to know how to keep time. If they just know that that particular alarm tone means second run, it can just go off and that alerts them to do their job. So that's pretty simple. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, another one about equipment, products, and modifications to the environment. An individual with Down syndrome was in a transition to work position at a gym, cleaning equipment and working the front desk. The employee needed to alternate between tasks and was having difficulty staying on task and staying organized. So it's not just one mail run here, it's different tasks that she's trying to manage and keep all of them going. Let's go to the next slide. So at GN, we don't really advocate or promote certain products, but if we're aware of a product that may be helpful, we want you to know about it. The Watchminder is a wrist-worn device. It does keep time, but it also actually can be programmed to have many, many different verbal prompts on it. It can prompt you to do tasks and task switching. Another thing is a color-coded like sticker system with a chart for timely equipment cleaning. So maybe, at a certain time, it's time to clean all the purple machines, and that's all the treadmills, and maybe in an indiscreet place there's a purple sticker, so anything that has a purple sticker gets cleaned at a certain time, something like that. And then another thing is on the cleaning materials themselves, marking, an inch at the bottom, that when you get the product to that line, you need to let somebody know to order or you refill those products. So there's several possible accommodations for this gym position that could be implemented to help this individual task manage, because the real issue she's having is not cleaning the equipment. It's the real issue is just keeping track of the tasks. So there's a lot, and we have lots more resources in our accommodation solutions for task managing. So next slide. So in this instance, we're talking about making the work site accessible. A food prep worker had difficulty standing the whole shift with only a 30-minute lunch and a short afternoon break. So in the afternoon, she got sloppy because she was fatigued. And that can apply to a lot of conditions, notwithstanding it could apply to Down syndrome. Next slide. So in this instance, this is a stand lean stool. So you can't really like lounge in it, right? But it does take the weight off the legs for fatigue relief. So it's a great tool for like cashiers and production workers and things that can't fully stand for long periods of time, but need to be in an upright position. And interestingly enough, I just saw, how walkers are usually in front of the individuals. There's a walker that just came out that the walker follows them wherever they go. And if they fall forward, they will not fall. And I will, I don't even know if we've got that linked in our website, but there's just so many tools out there now for mobility support and things like that, and ergonomics. So another thing is if she has to stand, she could get an anti-fatigue mat, those real thick foamy mats that you stand on that also take a lot of pressure off the joints for long-term standing. So there's a couple of things to try in order to relieve some of the fatigue. So you notice they didn't take away her essential duties or cut her afternoon hours. They provided something that would enable her to do the full shift. So that's what an accommodation does. Next slide, please. Okay, another category in addition to providing equipment and changing the environment is job restructuring. So let's talk about what that is and what it looks like. So job restructuring is changing when duties are done. And so in this example, we have an employer who requires everybody work overtime, and an employee with Down syndrome has asked to not work the overtime because they're fatigued and it exacerbates their fatigue. Overtime's tricky because it can be an essential duty. And I don't really get into the weeds on the legality of that, but I will say it may not be removable, or they may consider it, but it may not be removable. So let's go to the next slide and see how to handle this. The employer says no. In this case, overtime is an essential function of this job and you have to work it. And so now what? They denied it. Well, that doesn't mean that's the end of the story, because under the ADA, an employer should look at all effective accommodations that might be implemented. So what on-the-job accommodations could we provide? Next slide. So in this case, there's several things that could be considered. One would be possibly modifying the break schedule. The ADA doesn't require you provide any additional paid breaks beyond those that the person is entitled to, but those breaks might be broken up. Instead of 2 15 minutes, it could be 3 10-minute breaks, or an additional unpaid break on top of the 2 15. Another thing could be, could the person be assigned the more physically challenging tasks in the morning versus having a lot of that in the afternoon? Now that's going to be based on business necessity, but it's an idea. It's an idea to look at. I get that a lot with cognitive function. Some people are more cognitively functional in the morning, and in the afternoon they get fuzzy. And so we're looking at that. Those that stand lean chair could be brought in if they're having to stand a lot in the afternoon. Possibly extending their lunch hour unpaid, or we don't really want to extend their day anymore, but maybe a little longer break in the middle of the day, a chance to lay down, a chance to rest, and then refreshed, ready to go back for more time. So I mean, I can't say if any of these are going to be the solution, but there needs to be more interaction. And if the employer denies the request that the employee has made and doesn't offer alternatives, we have a publication called Your Accommodation Was Denied, Now What? And it talks about appealing that, asking for more information, why it was denied, asking if they need additional medical about the limitations, and even going so far as how to file a grievance if that's what you want to do. So we do have some support on a denied accommodation that doesn't get any offers for any additional options. Next slide. Okay, also a modified schedule, a reduced schedule, leave. Those are all things that are described as accommodation ideas for some conditions. So let's go into the first example. In this situation of modified schedule and leave, we have a job coach who contacts us for an applicant with a disability who has a job offer, but the schedule they're offered includes very unpredictable days and times, and they rely on public transportation. Okay, so what's important here is I get a lot of calls from employers saying, I'm not responsible for getting this person to work, right? Well, you're not responsible for providing the transportation unless you do it for everybody, which is not usually the case. But you are responsible for when they have to be there and where they have to be. So if there is an accommodation that you could provide, such as, if the public transportation runs at 9 and 5 and you've got them scheduled 8 to 4, could you schedule them 10 to 6? In some jobs that's perfectly doable. In this case, could you set their schedule just for this one person so they could use the public transportation? So go ahead and go to the next slide. So we suggest that. Ask for a schedule modification. Let them know you're a person with a disability, that you need a schedule modification to get there. Specifically, I need a consistent schedule, and that may enable this person to now be able to access public transportation and get to work on time. But it has to be asked for. So again, just them knowing you have a disability doesn't mean they know you need that accommodation. So asking for the specific accommodation is important in the process. Next slide, please. Modifying policies. I get this a lot. We have a policy that says you don't eat at your desk, or we have a policy that says that you don't bring any writing materials to this meeting. I've actually had that. And go ahead to the next slide. And the ADA does say that modifying a policy may be reasonable if it does not cause an undue hardship to provide, and that you do not have to modify the policy for all other workers. In this case, we're talking about extended training. And so we know that people with intellectual disabilities can learn. It just sometimes takes some additional time to learn. This is somebody working as a pet groomer in a store. They can do the job, but they're struggling with the amount of time that they have to train. They need more time to train because of short-term memory. And they're just not moving through the modules, but they get it. It just takes them longer. Next slide. So in this case, she was asking for an accommodation for extended training, a more relaxed schedule, and they got the extra time and were able to learn it eventually. So training accommodations is something we have specific publications on. If somebody doesn't read well, if they need more time, those are things that it's based on undue hardship, but they should be considered as accommodations when needed. Next slide. Okay, modified policies. Again, an employee who had difficulty with time management skills asked to use his phone and the apps he was accustomed to. And that's a big policy. No cell phones, Go ahead to the next slide. So in this case, the employer, modified their no cell phone use policy for this one employee to use the apps that would assist him in getting his work done. That doesn't mean he can use it to browse social media or anything else. It was just, this is a tool. And the reason for those no cell phone policies is so people don't goof off at work. So as long as he's using it appropriately, it may be reasonable. Next slide. So the last area we're going to talk about is providing support, such as support persons, job coaches, readers, interpreters. Next slide. And the specific one we're going to talk about is job coach. Okay. An employee had a job coach and an employment specialist coming into the job, and they helped them look for the job, get hired, go through the training period, and then the job coach worked during this time. But now it's time for the job coach to exit. They don't usually stay forever with the employee. Next slide. So what's great about this is we're using natural support. So I'm sure that's not a foreign term to most of you, but a natural support is a support that just exists within the environment. So an older employee took this person under his wings. He was able to help the employee in the same way the job coach could and on a more long-term basis as needed. So I think that's great for anybody to have a mentor, but it can happen with people with disabilities that somebody will be there to mentor them. Next slide. And finally, reassignment is our accommodation of last resort. Our example is a cashier who had extreme difficulty counting back change accurately after the automatic change counter was removed. Now, my first response is, why do we have to remove the automatic change counter? Can we put it back? But if we can't, go on to the next slide. I mean, if that system changed to where they're dysfunctional in that job now because they cannot count the change, and there's no accommodation that would enable them to count the change, which I would question because there's lots of apps for that. But in that case, reassignment to a position they can perform would be considered. Reassignment is listed as an option in the ADA as a last resort thing when the person cannot do the job with or without accommodations. So they were reassigned to the deli. Next slide. All right. We're going to open it up for questions here, but I want to leave you all with an action item. I would love it if you would visit our website at askjan.org. There's a tab at the top that says A to Z, and it truly is A to Z. There are several tabs in the A to Z page. Go to the tab that it says the first one, it'll open up, it will open up to by disability, and go ahead and review our page on intellectual disabilities. Then close that and go to the tab by limitation and look up a limitation that your individual is experiencing. It might be fatigue, concentration, learning, memory, conduct. All of those things will be listed there. Get acquainted to our website. And then if you don't find what you need and you have a specific question, email us. Chat in on our chat and let us know. Next slide, please. And again, all of our contact information is here. The portal to contact us would be on our website, but you can also go into the live chat, email us, and we do have a presence on social media listed at the bottom of the page. And that is my presentation, but I would love to have any questions that you may have.
Fantastic. I'm going to just jump back in here real quick and just say a big thank you to Lisa for such an incredible presentation. And yes, we will now move on to our dedicated Q&A session and have our presenter respond to a few questions from the audience.
Don't tell me I was that good. There's got to be some
I mean, you
questions.
did. You covered a lot, and I think you covered it very well, Lisa. We'll just wait to see if anybody else has
One thing I
questions.
say
And again,
about Jan is it's never one and done. Even if you call us, you know, I say when you get to the next stage of this process, you can call back, you can chat back, and because there's just so many variables with intellectual disabilities. It's just like autism or anything else. There's so many degrees of limitation and different jobs and the combinations that occur that even if you can't think of a question right now, I always have that feeling when we get off of this slide presentation, there's going to be a question that you're going to want to chat in about, and that's okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think this is a great point to also remember that to your point, Lisa, there is such a personalized approach here, and it's not that we can dive deep into everyone's unique situations on this webinar, and understand that there may be some more sort of personal questions that would require a conversation. So thank you all so much for your consideration and how we want to use this time. We did actually have a few questions come up just as you were sharing that. So one is, does the Jan site cover service dog? Does it
Service
discuss service dog?
dogs.
Yes.
Yes, we do have under on our A to Z by topic tab, you will find a link to an article on service animals. Something challenging about service animals is in Title I, employment, there's no mention of service animals. I understand that people with trained service animals have a right to public access, like taking it into a store or restaurant. But if you are in an employee-employer relationship, you don't have that same right. You have to request to bring the dog as a reasonable accommodation. And the employer will need to make a decision based on, obviously if you work in a hospital or in a kitchen, there may be rules that preclude that they can't get out of. So it's don't assume the service dog can go into a work environment. It must be requested and processed and approved as a reasonable accommodation. And we wrote a publication that's in question and answer form about the dog's training, the dog's medical history, places the dog can't go, what about other employees. It's a good article that I recommend you look up. We also wrote one on emotional support animals because they're not addressed
Right.
either. So
That's an
great
important
question.
distinction. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to try to paraphrase a few of these because I know that they are probably based on sort of personal experience. This one asks about someone who maybe have or may have been receiving an undocumented accommodation. So the supervisor was supporting maybe in some way, and in particular having to do with reading comprehension skills. So and then a new supervisor starts and won't allow that to continue until it's been approved through the HR process. So is there guidance on what might be grandfathered in with shifting in leadership? I guess is part of the question.
This is why, going back earlier, I said it's best to put your request in writing, even though you don't have to. And it's wonderful that someone would be willing to do an informal accommodation, but if it's not written down, what proof do you have that it was actually approved? And those informal accommodations, I mean, this happens a lot. I get these calls and people have been given schedule modifications, all kinds of stuff. The new regime, the new whatever, it could be the whole company was taken over or just a new manager, and they're saying, I don't have a record of this, and I might have a problem with it. No accommodation is forever, but ones that are not documented or written down are very fragile because there's no record, nothing in place showing that that was happening other than your word. And so I recommend, if you're dealing with something like that, that the person really will struggle without, I would recommend going ahead and having some kind of memo or note that that's being allowed
Yeah.
because of that.
That's a great point. And I'll just maybe add a little bit of a personal experience. So I have been a small business owner, a brick and mortar store where I, employed individuals with disabilities, but also where we sold goods that were made by individuals with disabilities. Um, and one of the things that I appreciated as a business owner was that clarity of expectations. So sometimes we can be a little bit, um, it seems like we're being maybe a little conflict averse because we don't want to confront that issue of needing the accommodation or asking for it. And so we might just kind of skirt the issue. We might not want to bring it up in conversation. I think if there is truly a dedicated employer who is wanting to see that individual succeed in the tasks that are at hand or assigned, then it's probably mutually beneficial and welcomed to have that conversation just to clarify. And to your point, Lisa,
Mhm.
to put it in writing. I think if I could encourage maybe the parents on the call to just broach that topic and say, hey, listen, this is something that we've talked about, and we want to make sure that we get it in writing so that you know what we're asking, but that also we know what we're getting as time goes on, and no one feels surprised or taken off
Yeah.
guard. So that can be
I
really
think what's
helpful too.
important about the ADA is we're not trying to be special or get something other people don't have. We're trying to even the playing field with these accommodations to enable somebody to perform at a level that's equal to other people. And so that you have that right. It's been given to you on the backs of a lot of people with disabilities who got this law finally to be legislated into place. So, exercise that right, because it's there so that you can, at least compete and not, you know, um, have to hide your disability or whatever. It's a right. It's not a
Yeah,
privilege or an extra thing. It's a right you have to be able to get
right,
these things.
right. Another question, and I know we're coming up on time, so I want to be mindful of that, comes from a parent who's essentially asking, at what point do I involve the employer in the conversation around issues that I know could be challenging for my family member, my loved one with a disability in the workplace? And I might just take this and say, kind of back to that same point we made earlier, involving the employer, being open in communication. Um, I think that there's sometimes, hesitancy from the part of the individual, the job seeker, the employee, the parent, to disclose. But I think, long term, to ensure the success of that employee and the sustainability of that employment role, it makes sense to have a conversation, clarify expectations.
Mhm.
I know that as an employer, but also when I was a special education teacher, sometimes my students would come to me with kind of a, here's what I come to the table with. Here's some of my strengths. Here's some of the areas where I sometimes need additional support, and that can be helpful. Again, I'm thinking sort of small business, but Lisa, maybe you can speak to kind of larger, maybe companies and ways to approach this.
Yeah. I think an important thing about a support person is to be proactive and say, I am this person's support person. Because if you're wanting to participate in meetings or come in or have input, you really should be you should be processed as an accommodation, basically. Um, you know, and that doesn't mean you get to call whenever you want or show up whenever you want. I think it's important for the employer to say, okay, I would love you to be involved when there's any kind of conflict, any kind of like performance meeting. When we have major policy changes, we should have you come in and make sure that this individual understands it. Um, so that both of you know the expectations for what support looks like for this individual, and the employer can be clear about what boundaries they have for a support person, and you can be clear about what you can bring to that employment in terms of your knowledge and background information about what's best for your person. So
Yeah, a great point. Great point, Lisa. Um, One other question, what determines how long a job coach works with their client?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
What determines how
Oh,
long a job coach, so a paid support person, might work with their client?
I think that usually job coaches would have goals set for that person, and it would just depend on how quickly or how well they're obtaining the goals. I don't know that there's a magic number there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know we have reached the 2 o'clock hour, and there's still some great questions regarding ADA rules and what current government spending impacts might have, or what the impact of current government spending decisions might have on the ADA and those types of things. So
Mm,
again, apologies for not being able to get to all of these questions, but we will certainly try to connect with you all, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us. So just want to pivot slightly here to let you all know that immediately following this webinar, a short survey will appear on your screen. We invite you to share your feedback regarding today's event and any suggestions or ideas that you have for any future webinars from NDSS. Your feedback is very important to us and will help us improve. We thank you in advance for what you will share with us back through that survey. Before we close, I want to take another moment to thank Lisa for sharing your time, your expertise, and insights with us today. Your guidance is incredibly valuable to our caregiver community, and we're grateful for the practical tools and thoughtful perspective that you've shared. Your work continues to help empower families and professionals to better support individuals with Down syndrome, and we're honored to have you with us today. So thank you again so much for being a part of this important conversation and leading this webinar. Also, thank you all for joining, to everyone that is online today, and those who may be watching in the future, for the care, the energy, the commitment that you bring to your roles as caregivers. Please keep an eye out for a follow-up email. It will include a link for today's recording, resources, and additional ways that you can stay connected with NDSS. And then again, just kind of looking down the line for the next couple of weeks, please stay tuned for the next couple of presentations. The next one in the series is From Overwhelmed to Empowered, Thriving While You Care, on October 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern. And you can register on the NDSS website. Look for that link in the chat as well. Also, be on the lookout for our entrepreneurship webinar series starting next month in October. And there'll be a link in the chat here. And if you have any further questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us at employment@ndss.org. Thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, Lisa.